And we touched on a little bit, I think yesterday, Terra, you described yourself a little bit as a data nerd. Is that right? And so I wanted to certainly address the fact that, when it comes to capturing data and managing data, it's certainly a challenge. It can be labor intensive, doing a lot of data entry. And then when we're capturing data, we always have to ask ourselves, why are we doing it? What is it that we hope to get out of it in the long term? What are we doing with it? How do we store it? It can sometimes be a challenge to import and export data. And so what am I talking about in data? We're talking about maybe it's names and addresses, maybe it's product descriptions, maybe it's a list of attendees at an event, maybe it's managing a list of donors, all different kinds of data that are going through our organizations, whether we're doing.
You got muted, Non.
Oh, did I get muted?
Yep. You might have hit your space bar, maybe.
Okay. So I don't know what you missed. So we've got lots of different kinds of data floating around, different sources. We're talking about attendee information. We're talking about donor information. It could be the kinds of products that we work on. Sometimes storing that data in specialized software gets expensive. Just even having Microsoft Excel can be expensive for a lot of folks. And then we have concerns about how we store and manage it. And are we adhering to privacy rules? Are we sharing that data inappropriately? Who has access to it? What do they do with it? Lots of questions around data. I wanted to call everyone's attention to two different products that are out there and available for you to use, I believe at no cost, depending on the organizations you're affiliated with. One is, let's see, Repair Monitor. So this is a service from Repair Cafe International. It's a web-based application to allow you to track items, projects as they go through a Repair Cafe event. You can have your reception desk check projects in, and then as your coaches work on them with your guests, they have the opportunity to key in information about the repair, the name of the product, the ultimate result of the repair. It's a lot of data entry. It's done in real time, and it assumes a certain kind of workflow around an event. And it's all very product oriented. It ends up generating statistics that sort of look like this. So it's not gotten a lot of uptake in the US. I suppose it's maybe more widely used in some of the European repair cafes. Congrats to Yorktown and New Paltz for making an effort to use it. You end up getting a lot of statistics, like lamps are very popular, so are clocks. Most of the time things get repaired. In this case, based on this limited data set, 68% of the time, or 69 to round it up. A very similar product is Fixometer or Fixometer. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. That comes from the Restart Project or Restarters, which is in the UK. That's an organization very similar to Repair Cafe, with much more of a focus on carbon reduction and carbon dioxide emissions. Very heavy in the UK, but they've created this service, and you can become a group within their network and use their product for free. And it's very similar to Repair Monitoring, that it's focused on tracking products as they go through the repair process. They have a little bit more embrace of open standards, and they participate in the Open Repair Alliance. But in both cases, I would say there is no searchable knowledge base. What we're ending up with is not a resource that you can go to for assistance in fixing a new item that comes through the door. It looks like this. They've put a lot of effort into good graphic design. They've got a lot of great imagery and some of the statistics. I believe this is live as of this morning, so it gives you an idea of how a tool like this can kind of roll up the numbers while each individual group can administer it and use it for their own purposes. The numbers roll up, and it may have benefits for doing things like advocating for policy changes, legislation, or maybe even going for grants. I do think, though, that all of these tools are maybe the wrong tools for a lot of the work that we all do. If we're doing community-oriented repair, I think there's a lot of gaps in what these two particular tools offer, especially because they don't really change the experience for the guests. They place a burden of work on our coaches, And they don't necessarily improve success rates in repair. They're not doing anything to help us reach out to new audiences, to find new volunteers and to broaden our reach. And they don't do anything to retain volunteers. I shared a picture here. This is one of my favorite pictures from one of our repair cafes. This is Roy. He's he's in his 90s, retired shop teacher, often described as a rock star in our world. And then to Shreya here is a high school student who volunteered to assist us in one of our repair cafes. And the two of them get the opportunity to work together. We've got some knowledge transfer that's going on. It's intergenerational. If Roy was also required to use his smartphone to key in data about the repair, it would be a major roadblock. It would take him out of the moment. He wouldn't be sharing with the people around the table. He would likely be struggling with a smartphone because it's just not technology Roy's adept with. And so I just don't see these kinds of tools as being a solution to a problem I have. To the extent that I'm tracking the individual items that get repaired, it's a very simple yay or nay, we fixed them or not, what kind of item were they, but I'm really not getting into the details of the individual items. I'm much more concerned about the people. And so a little bit, when we talk about data collection and data management, I would want us all to think a little bit about, like, what are we doing it for? How are we going to measure our success? And if we're measuring our success based on the number of items that we fix in our community repair events, I think we're measuring the wrong thing, because we are always going to be limited. If we, given the scale and the frequency at which we work, if we're going to measure our success by the number of devices we fix, or the number of pounds diverted from the landfill, or the amount of emissions that are reduced, we're always going to be very limited. And so when we're talking about data capture and data exchange and everything else around data, I would encourage us all to think about people and sort of redefine how we think about repair events, and consider that if we use technology, if we use all the data management tools to keep track of the people that we interact with, the audience that we're trying to grow, the target market, if you will, then when we think about people, then every single repair effort is a success because we have the chance to interact with guests. We have the opportunity to talk to them and encourage them to change behaviors around how they might dispose of an item, how they might interpret a breakage or a malfunction. We get the opportunity to influence their future decision-making. And we're transferring knowledge, as I showed you with Roy and Shreya, where there's a conversation happening, there's information being exchanged, and there's just perspectives that we have the opportunity to influence. And if we're thinking generally about all these community repair activities as a social movement, we ought to be talking about people and not the stuff. So I want to share with you a selection of tools that I think are useful in that regard. Oh, I should have had the slide up already, but just to hit these things. So when we're looking at tools and how we're going to interact with customers, rather guests, think of them as customers. Think of them as people you want to win over and have a relationship with over a long period of time. Get their names, get their addresses, know about where they live, and then follow up with them. Send them newsletters, send them advanced notifications of upcoming events. I would encourage you to flip the script on donors, change the way that we talk about repair, and not the number of items that we fix, but rather the number of people that we reach. And then listen to the stories that come out and capture those and reuse them and share them, because those stories are powerful messages. They're powerful testimonies for what repair can do. So as a result, we end up with different kind of performance indicators. So instead of counting tons or counting, kilograms of carbon dioxide, which I think is still kind of an abstract notion, I'm not really quite sure how I would visualize that. I would encourage you to think about keeping track of how many people sign up to an event, how many people actually show, how many walk-ins do you get? Grow your volunteer pool. Think about, what techniques are there to get more people engaged, maybe do more events in more locations. And think about your website visitors and social media engagement as a way of spreading the spirit of repair. So here are some of the tools that I use to do this, and I'm certainly happy to kick these around during the session and talk about others. I think MailChimp, unfortunately, they just recently changed their policy on the free account, but up until August, a free account was 2,000 records. Now it's 500. But for $13 a month, you can bump that up. And it really is almost a CRM. You can keep track of full addresses in there. You can keep track of, you can tag records with a variety of different kinds of tags for interactions you might have with them based on attendance or email communications. Salesforce is an option. I know some of us have kind of talked about that privately, you know, kind of take business tools and use them for some of our work. Salesforce is free for 501c3 organizations. You can get a small set of licenses. I find Evite to be a great tool for tracking volunteer RSVPs, being able to promote and get responses from volunteers, so I know who's actually going to show up in an event. Evite is definitely my go-to tool. Google Groups for sharing communications, just for having a list of volunteers and key stakeholders so you can communicate to them easily. Zoom, of course, we're using it now. It's become popular in the past 3 years. YouTube is a nice complement to Zoom, as I'm sure you know these recordings are going to end up on YouTube or Vimeo or someplace else. Google Forms and Google Analytics are other great tools from Google. They're free and you can use those. Google Forms is great for pre-registration. I use that for every single one of our events. I get a heads up on what kind of projects might walk through the door. And I've got names and addresses for follow-up. I've got, even if they don't actually end up attending, I've still got their name in our MailChimp CRM, so I can follow up with them later and invite them to future events. And Google Analytics helps us measure website traffic. You know, is we're putting more and more content online, and is that actually getting to people? And so again, it goes back to how many people are seeing it, how many people are learning about what we do, the message we're trying to send. To give you an example, this is what kind of MailChimp looks like. You know, when you're taking a look at your customer records, it's pretty much kind of a flat file, sort of like looking at an Excel spreadsheet. You can go through and you got everybody's names, addresses, last time they opened an email from you. You can keep track of last time they visited one of your in-person events. And then a few other examples, kind of, you know, taking a story that you hear in an event, maybe an interaction between a guest and a coach turns into a blog post that gets 400 readers a year, or a Zoom webinar on how to maintain sewing machines. We talked about sewing machines a little bit yesterday. We had a great event during the pandemic where we had 100 people tune in live and watch a 2-hour presentation on sewing machine repair. And then that turned into a YouTube video that you can watch now. I did a whole YouTube Zoom show on glue. I broke it up into little pieces, and there's a 5-minute video on YouTube of me gluing together PVC pipes, and it's had 12,500 views. So when you think about that in terms of the number of people we're able to reach, it's much more impactful than saying that we were able to save one PVC pipe from landfill. So that's kind of me throwing out a salvo in this panel discussion to say that we need to kind of shift our focus a little bit more toward keeping track of and engaging with people rather than tracking the individual items that come through the door.
Excellent.
So with that, I'll
Thank you.
stop.
Thanks, Don. I'm going to jump it over to Peter, and then I have some thoughts as well, and I'm really curious to hear where Peter's going to go with this. I know Cami in the notes said she could like see Peter's rebuttals forming as Don was talking. And to be fair, I think we're all very good friends, and we are all pushing towards the same thing. I think we just all have very different views on what we do and how we do it. So Peter, why don't you take it away? And just a time check, we've got about 20 minutes left in this session.
Peter, on your
Yeah, I was scrambling to pull my data together. Okay, so backing up, so the metadata, like trying to record all that stuff that's out of Fixometer, I agree with Don. So first of all, I'm totally on board with this idea that it's already, and Fixometer or repair events are already exhausting to the Fixit coaches. So the idea of lumping on that, the data documentation of what gets fixed and what its disposition is, I agree, is totally not appropriate. So my best solution I could come up with this was, can I push it onto the participant? And so after each of our events, I send a link. I basically thank them for coming, and I send them a link to this document I'm going to put in the chat, which is called our broken item report form. Where are you? Okay. Okay, so I use Google Sheets, Google Docs, Google Forms, Google Sheets for everything at this point. And so this basically asks you to ask the participant to document their own repair. Honestly, I get very little feedback. Very few people actually do it. I would say under 5% of the participants actually go to this effort. But in my efforts to do this with high schoolers and stuff, and they need community service credit and stuff, their compliance is much higher. So they feed this out. Now this data feeds a Google Sheet that then gets rolled up into the Restart Project's Fixometer. And actually the repair cafes do this as well. So, and I'm collecting more data. I'm collecting a superset of the data that gets rolled into the Fixometer. When we've had our data standards meetings around this, we've talked a lot about how we should really be doing this. And here's the link to Open Repair's website. We developed an entire data standard for how to do this, and we decided that they didn't want to collect item, make, and model. They just want to collect sort of broad taxonomy like toaster, blender, or, and that's turned out long-term to actually be an issue, because now if we're going to inform these national efforts or international efforts at doing things like the France's Indice de Repairabilité, where they want to track how things are going to, how things are actually working, how things are actually, what durability they have, we need to have the make and model. I'd like to be able to go back to France 3 or 4 years from now, because right now it's manufacturer reported, this index. So the manufacturer claims that their device has an index of repairability of 9, but with our consumer field data, we've actually shown that that same device really has a repairability index of more like 2 or 3. All right, so that's on the back end. Like, how do you collect the data of how we are measuring our impact there? So from the very beginning, I knew you got to collect data. Okay, Lord Kelvin says, when you cannot measure, your results will be meager and unsatisfactory. So every Fixit clinic that we've had since maybe the first few, there's an in-person registration form, and anybody on the planet who wants to start a community repair event, and they can basically get onto this form. It doesn't have to be a Fixit clinic. It is mostly Fixit clinics now, but I don't really care. And then we also have separately for coaches a separate sign-up form, and this is great for tracking. You want to be able to show your grantors and sponsors, say, we log this many community service hours, we have this much volunteer participation in these events. And so the underlying sheets that these things queue up, anybody who uses the system, they get access to the underlying Google Sheets. Actually, I put it one step away, so you can't break the sheet, because I give you edit access to the sheet, basically, so you can look at your participants and your items coming to your event. So that's how the whole system works at this point, where we've got registration sheets for everything. I've got separate parallel sheets for these two, for the online events, for the Zoom Fixit clinics when we were holding those. And then the broken item report that people fill out, hopefully afterwards. And that, like I said, that gets rolled up into the open repair stuff. So that's it for the moment.
Great. So it feels to me like we're kind of giving a very broad overview of lots of different types of data collection, and maybe a little bit of the philosophy of why we would collect what we would collect. Amanda, do you want to chime in? And like, what were your thoughts over this last, 20 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everyone. Slash, have my own takes of what we do, because as a tool library, there's just a whole nother level of repairability and fixing that comes to what we do as a function. And then repair cafes, I think, forms and data and things that come out of that are interesting. One thing we do is ask folks to pre-register and let us know what they're bringing, so we can make sure. We had someone that wanted to have 3 inflatable mattresses repaired, and we said, yeah, we need you to bring the patch, and then that way we had it ready to go. We had the space to be able to accommodate that. And the same thing would go for, understanding any repair. You might need parts, pieces, lamps, need all sorts of fixtures. We standardize and have some things available with our programs. And I did want to point out that we were open during the pandemic. I know Peter said nobody was doing repair cafes. We did. We opened and we did drive-through repair cafes where folks were dropping things off, because just like Don was saying, people were important into the story, and we have a really diverse community where we are. So there were people that don't have the physical ability to do the repairs and don't have the capacity to possibly repair things. And that's where we find our biggest synthesis, is with that group of people that needs repairs, not just wants to repair. And so building in that habitualization, I don't know what the right word is. Marie in Tacoma is doing a great job, because they're doing it every single week, and it's building in the capacity for people to know that that is something that they can do. One of my big successes as a human being, I think, is my kids coming to me and saying, I broke this, but we can fix it. And I feel like I've succeeded. I've done something right in the world, because that's what we have to focus on in the overarching. When it comes down to data and statistics and information, those are our ability to tell stories to bigger picture items. So if it's to your grant officers, or if it's to your public as a snapshot of your impact for the community and to the world, I think those personal stories are invaluable. It's incalculable how you can take someone's family heirlooms. I had someone brought a vacuum one time and said it was a member of their family. And I was like, okay, if that is what you need to do, I have no questions about that. I don't want to know. I just will fix your vacuum. What will make that happen? And that's of course the why, how you can move things along. Weights, the idea of trying to capture weights or full fixes or time. What we have really defaulted to is the, not lowest common denominator isn't the right word, but sort of what do we definitely know when it comes to things. So we categorize things. We have sharpening, we have mechanical fixes, we have electrical fixes, we have sewing. It doesn't fall within those 4 categories, we make it sort of fit, or we have another section that would go to that. So your mechanical fixes, of course, get really general. That could be jewelry to furniture. And then electrical, because of the skill level that requires the different sort of tier of skill. So, it helps to know what kind of fixers you really want to have part of in your community to capture some more of that specific data. I do that as a singular person, as the executive director. We have one person that captures that as a whole, and we work towards making that system more transferable. And that's, not putting the burden onto the fixer, not putting that burden onto each individual. So having it be, let me know what you know, kind of thing. But Tara, I'd be interested to see, because you coordinate some, touch and go stuff. So that's got to be even more, not statistically driven maybe, but like it has to be specific. You have to know what you're getting into.
Yeah. So this is such an interesting panel, because I feel like, of course, like many other topics in this summit, we could do like an entire summit just on this. And so I'm going to offer some counterpoints, because we're nothing if not contentious here. And it's interesting because I've heard Peter speak many, many times, and I respect Peter deeply. And I think Peter and I have very different dogma about repair. And so, and I've, at a different summit, there was somebody who was talking about bikes, and she was like, we're just like super into empowering people to be, comfortable fixing their own bikes. And I see what I do as wildly different than that. Now, that is not to say that I do not think that empowering and education is super important. I absolutely do. But for me, at the end of the day, I kind of see it as I don't even know how to say this exactly, but it's kind of an equitable situation
to know. Yeah. How to
and so for me, so I always kind of imagine like my friend who is a single mom, and her kids are in like everything, and she has like a crap ton of stuff going on in her life. And so I just imagine if she came and encountered a situation where it was, we're not going to fix this for you, but we're going to expect you to like be into this and be able to focus and concentrate, and we're going to coach you through this. I'm not sure that that would be the best thing for her. So, and I'm not saying that anybody else is necessarily doing that. But within my own program, I very much do focus on the numbers and the number of clients we serve, the number of things we get fixed, our repair rates. Those are very, very strong for us. So, and yes, I have lots of, so I will just quickly say that we've done kind of a COVID adaptation, and we now do something called Repair Goes Remote. And in 2023, we're going to do both. We're going to go back to in-person fixing on the odd months, and we're going to do repair remote or remote repair on the even months. So that's going to be really interesting to see how those two kind of like meld together. But throughout that all, we've kind of kept that same data set. So we're always doing number of volunteers that helped, number of items that were fixed and not fixed, and repair rate, and then number of clients served. So that's kind of the data that we are tracking. Having said all of that, I have lots of thoughts. Sorry, I'm all over the board here. I want to say that I do think I absolutely agree and believe that when you can tell a personal story about a repair, that's so much more powerful than numbers, right? Like I can say, yeah, we fixed 120 items last month. But that doesn't tell you anything necessarily. Whereas if I tell you a story about the heirloom, piece of jewelry that was fixed that had been broken for 7 years, that's wildly different, and that's wildly more impactful. So I definitely don't have all the answers by any stretch, but I am happy to share anything that that I can share with the group. And I was not paying attention to the chat while I was doing this, so I think maybe we should kind of back up a little bit and see if there's some.
There was a question that Dominic threw out there, which is the discussion around what, why, and how the data is collected to be actionable. And that's, I think that's what we're getting at, is like the why the tail wags for all of us is slightly different, and that's why the data points are slightly different. It's reactionary, in my opinion, to either how we've come to the practice or how we can facilitate the perpetuation of the practice. And I think that's why no one's wrong in this. It just depends. It doesn't fit every single scenario to have just one type. So we have to paint broadly. But Don, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, I don't think so.
Oh.
I think he's just been really quiet and polite and lovely this whole time. You've been unmuted this whole time.
Do you see other questions?
If there are any questions, please do put them in the chat. Otherwise, we're just going to keep talking, because this is these are like 3 of my favorite people in the whole wide world.
I will. I think there was a question in the chat about providing the slides that I shared. Right after the panel discussion, I will post a download link so you can pull down a PDF of those slides.
Thank you, Don.
And remember too that this is all being recorded, so you can always go back through and watch it again as well.
There's a question for Peter. Why wouldn't you require participants to complete their data form before they get their item back? But I think the clarity there is that you're working remotely. And so,
Well, sometimes we're busy. Look, it's a question of how you can scale or not. And look, I often say it an ideal. So a lot of you are providing essentially what I see as a free repair service. Okay. And I was always trying to emphasize from the get-go this idea that we really need to deploy these tools, these skills throughout the entire civilization. Because you and I both know, even if you could run your repair event 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, most of the useful stuff in your communities would still end up in a landfill. So I say in an ideal Fix-It clinic, the role of participant and Fix-It coach blur, and everyone's just rolling up their shirt sleeves to help everybody else out.
Mhm.
And if you look at the wording of my events, it's very carefully crafted to discourage a person who's looking for free repair to show up. Because what I'm really trying to do is create a civilization where they have that neighbor who has been to one of the events, who can help them. Because when they show up, because it doesn't scale. If they need that much hands-on attention during the event, like a lot of you have to take reservations, a lot of you have to figure out some way to manage the crowds. I throw out the tools in the middle of the table and they have to go at it. Sometimes I also say a Fix-It clinic is really a party for Fix-It coaches that the general public is invited to try to find out about and try to crash. Because what you're really trying to do is build that community you're really trying to build out that coach community and empower everybody in your community to feel like they're a coach.
Yeah, I agree with Peter in that, we can't be successful if we are only doing the repairs that come through the door, right? Because you think that, Home Goods and TJ Maxx will sell more lamps in a day than we can repair in a year. So, we're never going to have a significant impact on the waste stream just with our humble efforts, right? But it becomes, to what the extent that we can spread that ethic of repair and get, people who don't think of themselves as repair people willing to pick up a screwdriver and make an effort, then there's a slight cultural shift. And that's where the sort of the force multiplier occurs, not in our ability to move more lamps through a repair cafe, but it's in getting people to reevaluate the lamp they already own. Right.
I can't tell you what the percentage is right off the top of my head of things that are simply user error that we encounter, but it's daunting. I was going to say, I've been asked a lot what our competition is, or not necessarily just with repair, but we're fighting against a much larger system here, where, not to call specific retailers names, but yeah, there's planned obsolescence. I also think that there's a disparity with people that don't have choices about where they can purchase and consume items. So the lack of secondhand and reuse places, and the fact that Walmart only sells the 1 or 3 types, the toaster ovens that are destined for doom. That's what we're fighting. And when people can actually question, this is only lasting me 3 months, they bring it to a repair cafe and we say, yep, that's because there's a error within the whole structure that it placed, and now you have to go buy a new one. They don't even have the capacity to be able to replace it with something that's not going to be equally as dismal. And the idea that they can bring it to a repair cafe, they know that there's an option for that. Does that then allow them to consume unhealthily? Or do we allow that pathway for the potential for them to have something in that same cycle, if they're, again, getting a lamp from that same retailer or whatever, that they can have that replaced